customer, competitors, and culture. And I can kind of break those down. Company, of course, is you. It's your heart and soul. Why are you here? What's your story? What is that soul that we need to express through the package? Customer, of course, is who is that end target audience? What are they looking for? What needs are we solving for them? And getting into that and making sure we're understanding there and on the same page there. Competition, making sure that we're looking at the marketplace and what's on the shelf in your individual space and category and how they're approaching the consumer. And then the final thing is culture, which is, it might seem like an odd one, but throwing in culture is important to understand this place and this time and this moment and what's going on. What are, as a society, as a global society, what things are important? What can we tie into that's culturally relevant to really make the brand resonate moving forward? So we kind of look at those 4 C's together with our clients and partners and try to find the white space for the product. When we add those 4 C's up, what is that unique spot that we can claim as our own, and let that inform the strategy for the visual design. So we do this with, of course, all sorts of different clients as an agency, but the example that I did send over to Jordan is the Better For You ice cream. So this is an example where you can see in the before that they had all sorts of things. They had collagen, low carb, I think keto friendly was on one version of it, all these different things competing for attention with this kind of busy and overwhelming pattern. So when we went through this process and we started to look at the 4 C's and understand kind of the landscape, some of the things that really drove our decision making here, especially some of the customer data, it made it very clear that low sugar was really the selling point, that all of these other badges and value propositions didn't hold a candle to low sugar. This is a better for you ice cream that's so important for the different demographics we were looking to target. And we also found that there was a little bit of equity that was starting to be established for that pattern, that all of the different products, different flavors had some form of pattern that was really communicating ingredients. And the ingredients were so simple and so clean that we wanted to keep that, but to downplay it and to make it a smaller part of the design to keep from it feeling so busy and overwhelming. So that's sort of how lots of other decisions, of course, were made, but with lots of other rationale, but that's the general gist of sort of how we ended up in this place. So this is just one example of many, one recent example from early 2021. But yeah.
Awesome. I really appreciate that, Sabrina. And maybe this would be a good time for you to talk about what elements are really crucial on packaging so that they can really communicate the brand, things like hierarchy, flavor, all those kind of things.
Yeah, no, of course. I mean, I think, of course, you're going to have things that have to be included. So we always need to talk about those up front, make sure that we're, legally being thoughtful about what needs to be included. But in terms of as a whole, of course, the role the package plays is critical. It's often the first and sometimes the only touch point for the brand, for your end target market. So when we're thinking about what needs to be on the package and what's most important, the number one thing we're always trying to remind our clients of, it ties a little bit into some of what was said earlier, especially by Erica, that a customer has to understand what's going on here in under 20 seconds, often less. I think it's something like 13 or 12 seconds in retail and like 19 online is the data that Nielsen's putting out. So you have no time to grab attention. And when that shopper looks at the package, they're probably only going to remember one thing. So what do you want that one thing to be? Pick that most important thing that you want customers to know about your product and let that be the centerpiece of your design. And then, of course, you can add 2 or 3 things you want to show once they've picked it up or clicked on your link to kind of help close the deal and really kind of support that initial value proposition. But the number one thing I always try to remind our clients is that it's all about hierarchy of information. You have to be ruthless with prioritizing and limiting your copy that confused shoppers just don't buy. Confused people don't buy anything. So the more that you can kind of remember that would be probably the biggest piece of advice, or the highest level philosophy that we always try to make the center of our projects.
No, I definitely agree. And our original T Squares packaging, should brought up a picture and I'll find one. A lot of people, and when we would do demos, they would come by and they would say, I saw this product on shelf and it looked really interesting, but I didn't buy it. Right. And so there's a sense of they didn't fully understand like what it was and why they should buy it. They were initially intrigued, but it caused them to walk away. And so they actually considered it, and then they walked away because the packaging wasn't doing enough selling. Once we actually were able to sample and tell them what the product was in person, they're like, oh, this sounds great. And yes, I'll buy it. And so you're really doing yourself a disservice if your packaging is not aiding in that selling area.
Yeah.
So here's maybe kind of a statement or opinion that I want to put out and get everyone's kind of feedback on. From talking with lots of brands and seeing what works on the shelf, I have this philosophy now on hierarchy for between like your name, brand name, and then communicating what your product is, kind of like we saw in Greg's example. And that if you are in a category that is well understood and well received, call it granola or ice cream, that you have to do less education on what the product is and maybe more education on your brand and then your differentiating point. Versus if you're in a category that's new or still developed, that the kind of statement of identity and like what this product is even more crucial, and that needs to be kind of the largest, and your brand name might take a step back. What do you all think?
I will say that I completely agree with that. I think I would even add to it or amend it by saying that, yes, if your category is well understood, you need to do less education on the actual product type and can spend more attention on your brand. But also if even something as simple as the shape of your package is well understood. An ice cream pint, everybody knows what an ice cream pint is. That is clearly ice cream. It's in the freezer aisle. It is with all the other ice cream pints. There's so much less education, and the word ice cream is tiny on that package. So it's not just if the category is well understood, but even if the shape of the package is well understood and recognizable. So I would just kind of add to it.
Yes, I love that.
Yeah, I think Jordan, I think you're exactly right, and our latest design, I mean, it was a challenge in terms of restraint because you've got all these exciting things you want to talk about. Oh, we're shelf stable. Oh, we have no sugar. Oh, it's real fruit. It's all these things, and yet those become, I think, ultimately distractions. I mean, and so you've got maybe a couple seconds of a customer's attention, and so I think there is that less is more consideration. And in our case, we rightly or wrong, we decided that the main message is really communicating that this product exists, and then ultimately, if that's the hook that gets someone that's interested to pick it up, then the other parts of your package, primarily the back, can be part of what gets them intrigued and ultimately make the sale. So I think it's that message discipline, I think, is really critical, and what that message is really depends on where the product is in terms of the maturity life cycle, as you mentioned.
I would agree with that. I would say that on my bag, the name is definitely the first thing you're going to see. I would say that I would be willing to make it a little bit smaller. It's still going to probably be the first thing you read, but to create more space for marketing the flavor and then getting the actual value props, which in my current packaging is kind of hidden on the top tab, to just be a little bit more front and center.
Yeah, definitely love that. And then, I think, Sabrina, just one thing to mention on that you hit was the actual packaging being used to help sell what the product is. And I made that mistake with T-squares. We originally broke them up into individual, it was an energy bar, but broke those into like bite-sized squares and put them in a multi-serve pouch. And we thought like, hey, let's make this as different as possible. That also meant we were not merchandised next to other energy bars. We were in like the raw food set, which made it really hard for people to find or consider us. And then they didn't know what the product was to expect it. And so later on, we actually still kept the bite-sized squares, but put it in a flow wrapped individual bar shape so that people, when they see it, they know energy bar, protein bar. They could be a blank label and they would know exactly what to expect from it, at least generally. So absolutely love that. All right, so next, I know Erica, you do a lot of your business on e-com now, or you're kind of growing that. How have you thought about how your packaging shows up on either your website or Amazon that you might have to consider, that people should consider on digital shelf?
Yeah, I think my opinion is that the packaging itself, like just like a straight on product shot, which is usually your default image, is like, it is important, but it's less important than retail. And it's really the marketing you do around the description or the ingredients coming outside of the bag that can really do the selling. And that's the advantage of e-com. So one of the things that I recently optimized on Amazon is, I think before on my product gallery, there's just, you have the typical image of your product on a white background, which is a requirement. And then, I would have a nutrition fact, maybe a lifestyle image, et cetera, et cetera. But what I've done is I've optimized it where I'm actually like putting some text overlay where maybe there's a picture of a woman eating the granola, but then I have like call outs that say delicious, low sugar, non-GMO, just as something that they could easily read, in addition to kind of getting the feel of the product or the product in use. So I do think that when you have an e-com presence, really try to market the flavor, the taste, the benefits through additional imagery. You're not succumb to just a package. You literally have all this real estate around the product shot that you can use to educate and really market the flavor. And so use that to your advantage. And I think in that case, like, the packaging is actually less important.
Greg, what do you think?
I'll just unmute myself. Yeah, 100%. I think, you have all the opportunity of additional context in digital than you don't have on shelf. I mean, you can have lifestyle photos. You can have, find
healthy granolas in stores.
You can add, you can have all kinds of other supplemental information. So I think, having a bright color, functional, well-communicated package is great. In our case, I think, it gets a little bit down to function, because essentially if you're selling digitally, ultimately there's a fulfillment effort with that. And so making sure that it's actually going to pack effectively, it's not going to get damaged in transit. It's lightweight. I mean, those things actually become a little more prominent. I think having a clear message in your package obviously resonates regardless of which channel. But it's just, you have so much more opportunity online than you do on shelf. So the considerations aren't nearly as tough.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think one caveat that I'll add is, if you're making a big play on Amazon, that your product shot, the packaging should be readable at thumbnail size. Right. And so when someone, if you think about yourself browsing something on Amazon, you're like scrolling through that list of 20 products on a page. And as scrolling by, like, if, like Erica, like your purple stands out. If someone's looking for great Nola, that stands out. And now with the new brand, they can kind of see those flavors on there. And so they're like, okay, this is going to be, granola. I can find great Nola. Cool. Like, but, that tiny little image has to really showcase your brand. A lot of brands I work with and help them on Amazon, their text is so small that you can't read the brand nor the product name or the product identifier at that thumbnail size. I think they've been challenged by that. I think that's great. So Sabrina, as you're kind of thinking about the aesthetics of the packaging design, can you talk about how that can help a brand or hurt a brand? And using any of the examples of like brands that you've worked with.
Well, I mean, I think a lot of it, that at least that we see, comes back to really those 4 C's that I talked about in the beginning, that if you have done the due diligence and that you fully understand your customer and your marketplace and all of those different elements, that's really what matters the most. And trying to take your own personal opinion out of it if you can, or your own personal preferences out of it if you can, and really thinking about everything you're doing through the lens of that information and that research you've done is fantastic. We often see that there can be, in addition to what I said about the hierarchy, wanting to throw every single message on the front panel, That can be a real challenge for a lot of founders. You know, they work so hard to establish all these different value propositions and benefits and claims. So really just trying to remember that hierarchy, because that can really hurt a package design, is trying to cram too much information, making it too busy. There also can be a tendency, coming back to logo, to want to make the logo, you know, super, super ginormous, because you're so proud of it or it's so important, without really considering the category and if it's well understood, or, you know, if that's the best hierarchy of messaging. Yeah, I mean, other common, I'm trying to think of other common challenges or mistakes. I can see sometimes people will not really make sure, especially newer products, they might not think through the materials and make sure that the materials are working with the design instead of against it. So if you're printing on craft paper, for example, and you're trying to do this like neon or bright white design, it could be really challenging. Or, you know, just trying to understand the format and the structure of your substrate and your material before moving too far into a specific design.
One thing that I noticed with that, the Rethink Ice Cream, and I'll kind of pull that up, and I can talk about, because I've made this mistake before, right? You mentioned that they have this great flavor graphics in the background, but they can kind of just become busy or white noise, where it doesn't necessarily help what the product is. Versus what I like here, the background is like much more simple, but the flavor actually stands out in a larger way, so that it's like, okay, this is mint chocolate versus, you know, what are these little tiny graphics that I can only see if I hold it up to my eye.
Yeah, when everything's so busy and tiny and small, it all starts to kind of like, it's almost like when you blur your eyes and everything blends together. That's what starts to happen, that there's no single dominant element or hierarchy. So you'll see in that example that we did indeed, we noted that there was some equity, that people were like, oh, that's Rethink, they have that cool pattern, but it was not really doing any justice, or being done any justice. So blowing it up and making it more of an element, more intentional, limiting it so that it wasn't taking over the package, was a very, very strategic decision that we made in that specific example.
And then
I was going to say, sorry, I was just going to interject quickly. I mean, I think because there's, you know, as a brand owner, I mean, you're immersed in your own, you know, the specifics of your own brand. And so my earlier design, we had sort of a swirl effect, and the intention was to replicate what it looked like, you know, if you were looking down on a blender as it was swirling. Well, no one got that. I mean, I did. I mean, I'm sure I think it's so incredibly innovative and, you know, thoughtful and whatnot. But yeah, like customers don't.
We see a lot of that. We do. I'll piggyback on that, Greg, but we see a lot of pet ideas. So a founder gets enamored with or you know, a brand owner gets enamored with a certain idea that maybe served them well when they were in the farmer's market. Maybe they could tell the story that went with it, and it was cute and it was fun and it worked, but you don't have that context as you start to grow. And so sometimes we have to gently lay to rest pet ideas. And, you know, there's ways to do that, supported by data, you know, do customer service surveys, and really kind of dig in and present, you know, modern trends and best practices and all that. But that does tend to happen, that sometimes there'll be a pet idea that you eventually just outgrow, and that's okay. Maybe you can keep a piece of it, you know, a little tiny part of it can make its way into that swirl, can become part of your logo. Maybe it's embedded in one of the letters or something like that. And it's a little kind of thing for you that's a little quirky, but it's not such a dominant element anymore in the story that you're telling. Yeah.
Yeah, I've seen that a lot too, where, like you said, Greg, like if you have to make your customers think, or like if you have to explain in like a long-winded way like what this is, then you've like lost them. And especially even in like now and over the last year, we see where people are like in and out of a grocery store, right? Like they are looking for something. Even those who are doing discovery, they're looking for the product like maybe next to the brand that they buy, or kind of like quickly making a decision because they don't want to linger. And so all those like cool, cute things that you might add on, if they're not helping to like make that sale, then I think it's a missed opportunity. And, you know, that's why I even titled this webinar, Let Your Packaging Do the Selling, because like someone should be able to see your package, know exactly what it is, why they should buy it or not buy it, within those first 3 seconds. And right, your product's not going to be for everyone. And so you need to communicate that. And if they have to take more than that, then you've already kind of lost the battle.
Yeah, I mean, they're in a store with 10,000 other products, right? I mean, so, there's no mind share applied to your own. I mean, we're excited about it. We're thinking about it all the time, but I mean, customer now, it's a little bit like a military mission, get in, get out. So if you haven't communicated, what the product is and why they should consider it in, a couple seconds, and as you said, Jordan, I think you've lost it.
So
I also think
okay,
just
Sabrina.
to add on to, I also think just to add on to that it can be a bit of a balancing act that yes, you have a couple seconds, you need to communicate that unique selling proposition, right away, get it out there. But I think that there's also an opportunity that once someone has purchased the product, once they've taken it home, once they've made that commitment, to create that loyalty through opportunities to surprise and delight. Is that printing on, unexpected flaps or little kind of messaging that's kind of buried in there, an opening, an unboxing experience. Those kind of little details can be enough sometimes to build brand loyalty, to surprise and delight the customer as they're experiencing the product. And we definitely see that, bringing it back to e-commerce. We see that for unboxing for direct-to-consumer brands, that there's a whole nother layer of experience that the customer gets to have. And are you using that to your advantage? So yes, keep that front panel, that hierarchy, that initial messaging simple, but then what's that, secondary or tertiary level that once they're experiencing it, how can we surprise and delight them, essentially? So it's important not to forget about that component as well.
Yeah, I love that. And one thing I'll do is just open up if anyone has any questions for any of our panelists or things that you even want to ask about your brand, feel free to drop those in the chat now, and I will ask those to our panelists and integrate those into the conversation. So any kind of questions about anything that we've been talking about is fair game. Real quick, actually, talk about, and maybe Sabrina and others, on the unboxing experience for e-commerce. What do you do now, and how do you think about that experience for your customers and your brand, or your clients, Sabrina?
I mean, I can just briefly say that it really depends. It depends on the product. It depends on the opportunity available. Sometimes it's going to make a lot more sense to have an insert or a secondary thing. Other times there's going to be certain like flaps or materials that you can really think of exciting, witty copy that reinforce your message, your brand values, and kind of who you are and your story, and kind of pull them in. We've even seen people leveraging things like QR codes. They're kind of coming back a little bit now in our COVID world. So there's so many techniques and tactics, but it's hard because it can be very different for different circumstances and the actual substrate and format of the package. But I would say it usually comes back to using those opportunities. I've used the word a few times, to surprise and delight, and to tell a story not only about your product and your company, but the experience that the customer will get from using it. And that experience and what that means about them. We see, especially with millennials and Gen Z, that they're sometimes buying more based on what a brand's going to say about them and their worldview, just as much as how that product performs functionally or like what it'll do for them. So it's really an opportunity to kind of dig in with that type of secondary messaging. So I'll open it up to the others, but.
Yeah, I mean, there's some good considerations and what you just mentioned there. I mean, we send a personalized note, just sort of a thank you from the founder, basically just for taking a chance on a new product and a new brand, and convey that our appreciation for it. And I think that that's certainly resonated. That obviously gets a little tougher to do as you expand and you get more focused on productivity and whatnot. But ultimately, this may be leading back to that culture point, which is what's the what do you want to convey about your brand. And so just having as much as possible having a personal connection, that was important to myself and my partner. And so we've tried to do that with with each direct customer delivery. So that's worked for us. So.
On my side, I would say that the unboxing isn't that special. I make sure that everyone has an insert though, where I actually just revamped this front side, really kind of explains the mission and the brand values. And then the other side shows kind of the whole line. So assuming someone didn't come and buy all the flavors, they immediately have this touch point that shows what the variety is, as well as a discount for their next order.
I love that. I see a couple people, Rebecca and Sasha, kind of mentioned of they love get packaging feedback. I don't know if we have time today, but we can definitely set up another session to talk through that. Tyler had a question.
Seeing in terms of gamification for packaging design, like QR codes, augmented reality, NFT, collectible items with purchase, anything like that.
I don't know if anyone wanted to take a crack at it. I mean, the QR code is one that we currently don't have now, but that's one that we're anticipating to use. I think it's it's come back into prominence, but it's such a it's a great way to be able to open up a whole range of content to a customer at store level. So we're definitely looking into that for our next round.
One example that I have seen actually is the brand Abet. They do a kind of veggie filled pasta sauce. They actually just did a campaign, just show a quick video here, with Roblox, where they created like a map where kids could actually like play and run and explore the Solo Adventureland, and their bottles were digitally produced to create this like obstacle course that they could play with. They had the two great YouTubers like really playing that, and this has got what 225,000 views of kids kind of playing Roblox with their sauces, right? So family-friendly brand. They targeted this towards their audience in like a fun, creative way. And so, yeah, I think there's some really interesting things that brands are kind of doing with things like that. With especially with a partnership that probably paid for itself from the creation on there.
Yeah, I think it depends on the category sometimes too. Like the 19 Crimes wine label, I'm sure lots of people are familiar with. And I mean, what they did, it's such a competitive space. I mean, you are literally selling so heavily based on that label in the wine and spirits category, and just basically scrapping all preconceived notions and reinventing and doing something fun and novel is really working well for them. It's become a household brand among the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of wines that we see in the liquor stores. But I mean, it's not, I would caution against thinking that it's like a cure-all or it's going to work every time. It sometimes needs to be the right time and the right place and the right content and the right environment for it to work.
Awesome. And then Theo, we'll do a couple kind of rapid fire questions if one of you wants to take this, but Theo noticed that, could you share some insights on packaging language, buzzwords like plant-based, vegan, gluten-free, what's really important and what kind of claims are on trend, like fiber, low sugar, things like that?
I don't know who wants to go.
Greg, you want to take it?
Yeah, I mean, there is a bit of a claim du jour effect. I mean, fiber obviously is gaining in prominence. I mean, nutrition's a funny one, right? I mean, if we look through the journey, it was calories were bad, then fat was bad, then sugar was bad, then now fat is good, then protein is good, then fiber is good. I mean, we've made a choice to just stay away from really being incredibly clean focused. I mean, we do mention no sugar, real fruit, dairy free, gluten free. We have those points, but we really made the decision, rightly or wrongly, not to feature them prominently, and we focus more on a flavor message. So whether that was the right strategy or not, I mean, ultimately we just said we didn't want to get into a game of what's the latest trend, and so I think that was just a bit more of a philosophical point. So, but I don't know if I really answered the question, other than fiber really is now, from what we see, is really the emerging focus.
I don't know if I could really speak on like a macro trend view, but I would, first when I started and I shifted to that rebranded packaging, there are all the different value props that I felt were important to me. And what I did, and it was super scrappy. I don't know if this is the right approach, but it was a scrappy one. But I literally created a Google form and shared it with like as many people as I knew. And I told all of them to stack rank them. And the things that popped up were like low sugar, refined sugar free, all that. But I think, you know, if you can get some qualitative data and, you know, you want to make sure that the audience isn't super biased, that could be a quick way to just see what's important to the people you would want to market to. The other thing I would say is there are rules around good source, great source of certain attributes. So make sure you're checking the FDA.gov website to validate those. Like good source of fiber, I think probably has a quantifiable metric. And then I've heard in some categories, and I don't know if this would apply to granola, which tends to be pretty plant-based, but in categories like meat and dairy, I think I've heard or read research that using a vegan claim actually is not a positive thing. Plant-based is actually better. I don't know if people have this perception of, oh, if it's vegan, it's not going to taste good. Fact check me on that, but someone else who I know has a vegan cheese line, she told me that, so she knows that about her category.
Yeah, I've definitely seen that vegan has a connotation with a very specific lifestyle, and it can be dissuasive for like flexitarians or people looking to try it as well. And Ken has a question on how are you thinking about materials used for your packaging and sustainability, either now or in the future?
In philosophy, it sounds great, but so far what I've heard, and I haven't researched this in depth, but most of the sustainable packaging won't have the same shelf life capabilities. So for me, it's a big deal breaker.
No, that's definitely key. And I think too, just to add to that, I'm going to be releasing a article out on the food bevy industry news section later today on sustainable packaging, what's out there now and some examples, and what's kind of possible and what's not possible yet. So be sure to check that out. It's the physical kind of materials are still at their like earlier stages, and they're fairly expensive. So it makes it a little bit prohibitive if it's not like a core tenet of your brand, but hopefully that becomes more available and more affordable for brands and moving forward, because I think it does make a big impact on our planet.
Yeah, and I can speak to that because everyone does want to be seen as nature friendly at the, you know, and at the moment, and many brands are seeking to communicate green credentials in their packaging. Maybe it's cost prohibitive or it doesn't make sense in the actual substrate, but we're seeing a lot of patterns inspired by nature, organic line art, like things that suggest natural ingredients, and just a general concern for the environment come through as design elements very, very often right now. So.
Love that. And then Mark has a question. Can anyone recommend any research covering consumer psychology and packaging design? Like how many messages a consumer can absorb at a glance, what direction, like how consumers read packaging. I know, Erica, you talked about it from like what claims are kind of important. I think, surveying, especially your existing customers or who your target customers are, is a really good way. But Sabrina, I don't know if you've come across any, I know there's a lot of kind of talk about it, but any kind of studies or research that you've seen?
Oh, well, it's hard to point to something exactly right now by name, but we're always trying to stay abreast of the latest consumer data, whether that's something that's been done by Nielsen or one of the main outlets that's kind of researching and marketing around this topic. So there's like basic principles, there's principles of design, there's principles of how people consume color. That have been known for years and years and years, how people read and consume information. It's always in an L-shaped pattern. All those sorts of things are just basic principles of design that have been tested and reported on time and time again. I feel like I should have a go-to resource, but it's really just kind of part of my daily job and work to kind of keep abreast as things change through a variety of sources. But I'll see as a follow-up, maybe I can share with you, Jordan, some of the things that I turn to most frequently.
Perfect. And then just real quick, there's this group called Claire Treza, and they actually do packaging studies and eye testing. And so you can send them your packaging and they will analyze using consumers, like where their eyes actually go through first. They'll create these heat maps that you can then use to determine if your messages are resonating with customers and what they're reading. So if you're interested, shoot me an email and I can definitely connect you with their team who can do this for your packaging. All right, perfect. So I really appreciate everyone for joining us today. Erica, Greg, Sabrina, this has been so great and incredibly valuable. Thank you so much to our audience here today. If you didn't get to your question or have any other follow-up questions, feel free to shoot me an email, hello@foodbevy.com, and happy to pass you along to our panelists to have further follow-up or conversations. If you want to learn more or you're in the midst of doing a packaging design or a branding redesign, feel free to ask us for any feedback. Abet is a great agency that really understands like how food works and to be well situated in this industry. Yeah, I know I used a designer who was not in the food industry, and there are a lot of misses that we had in our packaging in terms of hierarchy, claims, information. So definitely working with someone like Sabrina, Abet makes a huge difference. So please reach out if you have anything else. I'll be sharing out a recording of this after the webinar later this weekend. But other than that, have a great Friday, have a great weekend, and we will talk with you soon. Be sure to check out our upcoming webinars next week. We have one on Tuesday, one on Friday. Tuesday is about merchandising strategy. Friday is about talking with distributors and chargebacks and how to account for that. So lots of great information coming up. Thanks so much, everyone. Have a great Friday.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you.